just to take the notes about the main comments, action points. So it's, I mean, not a lot, but we need to have some additional. I mean, we will be taking notes as well, but we need somebody else to help us taking notes. I see that Matthew volunteer. He's online, so thanks a lot, Matthew. That's very much appreciated.
Thank you very much, Matthew. And anyone else, please, if you can help Matthew also, make sure that, especially if you make a comment, take a look and verify that it's well captured. Okay, so we can get started. No? You want me to share this now?
I'm already sharing. No, I was. Somebody took me. I'm doing it again. Okay, somebody reloaded.
This room is, I think, really bad for Wi-Fi for the chairs. There's an Ethernet cable down there if you want.
Okay, well, we'll get to that. Thanks. So hi everyone, welcome to the Madinas working group and IETF115, and thanks a lot for staying at this time. We're the only ones stopping you from here to dinner, so it's very much appreciated, your presence. So I'm Juan Carlos Zúñiga.
I'm Carlos Bernardos.
Thanks. So can we go to the next slide? Oops. You want me to share? So sorry about that. We're having some view, right? Okay. So not well, as usual, this is an IETF meeting, so we have to respect the procedures and policies of IETF. So by participating to this group, you agree to these processes and policies. And if you are aware of any contribution that is covered by patents or patent applications, please let us know and mention it. You acknowledge that the information here, written, audio, video, and photographic, will be made public, and personal information that you provide to the IETF will be handled in accordance to the privacy statement. And also you agree that you will work respectfully and you will treat likewise to other participants. If you have any issues, please contact the Ombudsman. And you have here the BCPs for all extra information that you require. So please use the QR code or log into the Meetago to capture your, record your participation with Data Tracker. And we will use Data Tracker to manage the queue. It's really useful for us to make sure people remote also understand who is talking. Please keep your audio and video off and wear masks. And that's it. So we have the agenda, Meetago. By now, I think you should be more than familiar with that. So again, the minutes will be taken. The meeting is being recorded and your presence will be logged. So you have the link there or in the Meetago, tool for the notes. So please try to follow up with all this and help Matthew with the note taking. All right. So today we have about an hour. We'll give you an update on the working group status. Then we will move to the problem statement by Jerome. Then we will have a MAC address randomization document. Carlos will present. We then want to have some open discussion on the BCP that we have prepared some slides. That's the other milestone that we have in our group. Then I will give you an update about the open roaming experiment that we've been discussing with the WPA. And we will discuss next steps that are important from here to Yokohama. Are there any questions or comments about the agenda? All right, hearing none, we can go to the working group updates. That was it? Okay.
All right. Thank you, and welcome everyone to this call. Sorry, I'm not on site with you. Let's go to, I mean, this document, we've been discussing it a lot. So, you probably are all aware of what it says and what it contains. But as there was some interesting conversations during the on the list, I would like to reassess where we are and, of course, ask for the group inputs on where we go next. Can you go to the next slide? I don't seem to have control over the slides. Thank you. So as you remember, we have two documents in flight. We'll talk about the other one in a few minutes, but this one is what we used to call it the framework, and now we call it the use case. And the goal of this document is to try to better refine, our definition of where the problem space lies. And for that, we found, 2 years ago, that we couldn't agree on some basic vocabulary definition. So what this document does in the use case is start by defining some terminology. When we say, they can spy on you, they can see your MAC address, who is they? So in this document, we go through the different actors that are involved in at least the wireless network action and monitoring. We also define different types of devices, the difference between what we call a personal device and a shared device, shared service device. And here we borrow from definitions from the IEEE. Then, of course, we look at the technical entities, the switches, the router, the services, the DHCP, DNS, all these things, but also the human entities, people who are, spying on you, the eavesdroppers, but also people who administer the network, who administer the services of the network and give you access to the internet, and people, of course, on the internet. And of course, we also define some environments because it's clear that although we shouldn't trust anybody anywhere, sad world, there are some places where the level of trust might be slightly different. For example, if you are in a public venue like you are here, I'm expecting that the trust you have that you can send your unencrypted credit card out over the air is fairly limited. However, if you move to an MDM control device in a factory, the level of trust that you have in the network, in the environment, and the network actors, whoever they are, is likely to be higher, simply because there is no likely PII on your device, and also the environment might be controlled. So we define these different environments, and of course we define this different level of trust. So that's the general structure of the document. As you may remember, we went back and forth on the early definitions of this document, and we spent a lot of work there, together as a group to try to define exactly the scope of that document. So I think that's getting to a point of fairly good stability. Then as we formed the WG, we had a few edits on these documents, and you see here a list. The latest update is what we have now as V3, which occurred between our last inter-meeting call and this meeting, where we had two types of edits. One is typo fixing. I received typos, and I heard from some of you that were still typos. I'm expecting there is still typos, so please mention them. If you tell me there are typos, it's not useful. Tell me where you see a typo so I can correct it. I'm sure there are still a few of them. But the other thing we did also was that in V2, in the last section of this document, which is section 7, we started listing what we call solutions that were already existing. I think we mentioned, among others, WPA2, open roaming, and a few more. In this V3, I received comments offline of people say, oh, you should also mention this. There is also that solution and so on. And I incorporated those. However, one big mishap I did, and I would like to apologize to the group for that, is that I received those comments and I made the integration and posted a new revision, where it's not what I should have done. I should have, at least, pulled a branch from GitHub and, communicated back to the list a suggestion for where, the changes should be. So, I intend to fix that. And in fact, thankfully, there were some dialogues following this update, which is going to help fix that. At this point in this V3 of this document, it seems that the goal is to look at the use cases. So that section in section 7, where we look at solutions, might not be the element that is entirely needed anymore. I mean, it may be very useful for another document, but if we are focusing in this document to the use cases, this is not use case, it's a solution. So maybe that section doesn't belong to these documents. However, some of you have been, Michael in particular, have been suggesting that we should probably add to our group task the creation of a third document, which could be something like a BCP. In that case, that document would be examining, the possible solutions, and maybe that section 7 would fit better in that new document than it is in this document. So one possibility, to fix the addition that I did without getting the full feedback from the group, is to move those additions, in fact, the entire section 7 on solutions, into a form of annex, so we can store that section there until the group, maybe today or maybe on the mailer, or maybe on next meeting, decides if we create a BCP and if that material can be useful for that BCP. I think it would be ways to destroy it, but at least store it maybe in an annex. Also, feedback I got a lot about the section 6.3. I'm not going to flash it here, but you may remember this is what we call the requirements formulation. And what this is a list of elements that we think are useful for the group to continue its activity. And what happened there is that this was useful when we were creating this document, but at this point, this working group, but at this point the group is created. So it seems that this section 6.3 has fulfilled its goal and is not really useful in the context of the use case document anymore. So my proposal would also be to delete that section 6.3, which is not necessary. So those are the two main things that I would like to offer to the group for feedback. Of course, I can always undo the typo fixing, but I think this is a trivial thing that we want to do anyway. So let me pause there. I see there is already a hand raised, so we can get feedback.
Thanks, Carlos.
Carlos Bernardo, UC3M. I have a couple of questions or comments. One is regarding the requirements. I think that in our charter we are expected to provide that use cases and requirements document. So I think requirements should still be there, where although I agree that there are some of the requirements that are there currently that probably should be removed, because are like more requirements for the community on what needs to be done, not requirements regardless of RCM and identification and all these kind of things. Those I think belong to this document. The other ones probably don't. That's my first comment. Then second comment is on the actual use cases. The document is called use cases. Well, it's not called use cases and requirements currently. I think we should probably change the name if we keep the requirements to reflect that. That will be the second comment. And then there is a third one. That is as currently basically explained in the document, although there are use cases, there is maybe a bit hard at the first read to find the use cases, because we are talking about the trans relationships and the network environment. So not really in the shape of like classical use cases, maybe like in the WBA document is explained. So I don't know, that may be worth trying to do a bit of rewriting to make the content more use cases alike. That will be my third comment.
Thank you. And while you're on the mic, may I ask you for clarification? So do you envision that we would add a section that would be use cases, or we would rewarp a section that we would be calling use cases? Yeah,
I think that's a personal comment. So I mean, you may disagree, and the working group may disagree, but I think I was expecting more like use cases section or something that is like use case A, B, C, and D. And we don't have that in the document per se now. We have like the trust levels, and then we have the different environments. The environments at the end of the day is kind of the use cases referring to the trust levels, but it's not explicit. So I think something more explicit may help in the readability of the document, but that's my personal opinion.
It makes sense to me. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Carlos. Eric?
Eric Vink. I think indeed that we need the BCP document, so we will talk about it later in the agenda. So Jerome, I think your suggestions to move this part out of your document into the draft or skeleton of another BCP document is a really good idea.
All right, thank you, Eric. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't think.
Oh, see,
well, we have
you
you
in the queue as well. Yep. Sorry.
Hello, you. We cannot hear you. Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we
now
can.
we can.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So my question is, I think from the BCP, I think I try to follow up with Carlos' comment. So for the VCP document, are we going to? I mean, are we going to address per environment, or you try to address it per use case? Because I think like what Carl says, like the current draft, it doesn't contain a concrete use cases. So I just want to hear from you like what you propose for the BCP. Thank you.
So, I mean, my comment was regarding the use cases. I think that we need to describe a bit more into use cases format, kind of the use cases. So it's a bit about restructuring a bit the content that we have. So this is kind of independent on the BCP. So the BCP, I think, is more related to the solution part. That I guess that discussion should be moved to a different document. So we keep separated the use cases and requirements from the actual BCP document.
I think my question is like for the BCP structure. I think today you usually, I mean, BCP, you try to address a scenario or a use case for the BCP, for like what scenario to use what. This is called BCP. Yep.
Well, that's up for the working group to discuss because sometimes also the BCP is more related to how to address the requirements, right? Not necessarily the use cases. So the structure, I don't have a strong opinion. I will probably start from the requirements and then how to address the requirements with the BCP, but I guess there may be other ways of doing it.
Okay. I think I got you. So in this case, so what we need to do here, I think, for the use case, we will have to more explicitly, either like doing use case or requirement, so that then because I think in the end, I want to make sure that the BCP address something that we really are clear what the problems we try to solve.
Juan Carlos Zúñiga, I'm putting myself in the queue, and yeah, I think just to add a couple of comments, I agree, and just at least in my mind, the structure would be we need to identify the set of use cases, what are the requirements for each one of these use cases, then we need to identify what existing solutions there are, and we provide what are the best common practices regarding these solutions, because we don't know if these solutions are being implemented or not, or if there's no issue to solve, or if there's a gap. So that is basically the outcome that the BCP will provide. This is the best common practice that there is a solution, you should use it. Or we may find out that there is a gap, a hole in one of the use cases for one requirement, in which case we will figure out what to do, if we need to talk to other organizations, other working groups, if we need to recharter, etc. But that we will not know until we have identified the use cases and the requirements. So again, BCP is what it says, best common practices on existing solutions. Okay, so I think we can move to the next. Then you want to stand up?
Okay, so this is Carlos Bernardos representing the draft on behalf of my co-authors. So next slide, please. So just a brief introduction of what this document is about. This document is about documenting the state of affairs regarding the MAC address randomization, the RCM in IETF and other SDOs, and also including what vendors, mobile OS vendors are doing. So you have the details in the slide, but just a reminder of what we are talking about in this document. Next slide, please.
Okay, maybe you can want to speak a little closer to the mic, please.
Let me. Okay, should be now better. Okay, so this is the table of content, and I'm highlighting in yellow the changes from the last IETF cycle. So there were a couple of, well, more than a couple of pull requests from Michael regarding the changes that we should or we could do in the document, and we discussed that in the last meeting about the taxonomy. We discussed that that was a good idea to include in the document, although we need to really check what we are putting there to avoid any unclarity. So at this point in time, I basically added the content provided by Michael. Thanks again, Michael, for providing that. And I would like to, we will go through that in the next slide, but I will benefit from this chance to ask for feedback to the working group. So we really need input from all you guys to improve the content that is there in the taxonomy. I think that taxonomy is a useful thing to have. Next slide, please. So this is a summary of the taxonomy. So basically it's about the different policies that maybe follow for MAC address selection. And there are like 5 different approaches or categories there. The classical one, that is the per vendor OUE MAC address, or the legacy, or the one that we will have in most of the devices up to the recent past. That is, the device has a pre-burned MAC address there, and this is the one that is used. And then we have a set of different approaches per device generated MAC addresses. So basically, this is randomly generated by the device, and it's done at the beginning of the lifetime of the device, and then it's used for the rest of the operational lifetime of that device. That's a possible approach. We need to really document it, when this may make sense, and possible issues. Then we have the per boot generated MAC address. In this case, this address is generated per boot and is not stored in any permanent storage. So this basically means that that address will change on a per boot basis. Then we have the one that is more typically used now by mobile OSs. That is the per network generated MAC address. So basically, you generate and use on a per network basis this randomly generated address, and typically indexed by SSID. So that's what I mean by per network basis. And then the per period generated MAC address, that is basically a way of rotating the address. So the mobile OSs use a kind of a combination, depending on the OS, on the last 2 policies, the per network generated and the per period generated MAC address. So I think this is good, and a good way of kind of documenting all the possible approaches. And again, I would like to ask for feedback on additional policies that we may be missing in the document and completing the way we have documented them. Next slide, please. And this is just a summary of changes. So in the last 2 revisions, which are the ones that took place between last IETF and this IETF, basically we added the section on taxonomy. We removed some BCP 14 terminology that we have, or text that we have in the draft that didn't apply. And we also added some other minor things that were submitted by means of GitHub pull requests from Michael. So basically, those are the main changes. And this is it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So we have a question from Mr. Richardson. And Eric.
IETFers are getting shorter and shorter. Michael Richardson. So I just wanted to thank you for accepting it. I wanted to point out to the group that some of those policies are stupid policies. And part of the point of naming them is so that you can say, that device has a stupid policy and whatever. And the vendor could say, oh, yeah, that's what policy we're doing. Okay. And it could be that there are other policies that don't fit into that, but that some people are doing, and they're also stupid. And we should also give them names for the simple reason of being able to discuss what are bad ideas, right? And I also wanted to say that there's lots of cheap pieces of hardware that don't have OUIs in them, and you turn them on, and they do something. And so they're actually using per boot generated MAC addresses, but not because they thought they should do that, but because they actually didn't know they had to put an OUI in their device. And they come up at 0000 and then some random numbers at the end. And, you know, so they're actually doing some privacy stuff by mistake. Until you get 3 of them on your network, and then your network melts. So it could very well be that there's a policy that's not in this list. And I guess let's say per network generate MAC address, that's what all the mobile devices did 5 years ago, suddenly, right? And then Apple and others have moved to the generating a new one every 12 hours or something like that. And I guess it just falls down on its own. And I think that's that's the policy which we all would like to use, and it's the one that gives us the most problem elsewhere. Yeah.
One question, basically following up on your comment. I think that what the mobile OS devices are doing today is
closer to the mic.
Sorry, I think that what the mobile OSs are doing today is more a combination of the last policies, right? Because it's rotating the MAC address, but it's doing on a per SSID basis. So maybe, I don't know if we should, I don't know if generate a new policy or comment, but I think it's a combination of both, right?
It could be. As my understanding is from the settings I've seen and things, and what Dave Thaler and we've discussed in previous meetings, is that in most cases you either tell the device, use a permanent address that I told you that you had, use the address, the same one you had last time, which is per network generated MAC address, or randomly change it periodically. And as far as I know, the randomly change it periodically doesn't come back to the same address ever on the same network. So there's no relationship as far as I know when you do that.
So maybe as a co-author, just trying to respond there. I mean, it varies also from version to version of the OS. So
right.
But latest things is mainly you make sure that you don't change while you are associated to the network, so that you don't break your connections. But as soon as you disassociate, yeah, well, if you pass over the period, then you can get a new address.
Okay, so actually that's a new policy that's different, because my understanding from our previous meetings is that there were devices that, while you were associated with the same network, were going to change their MAC address, which causes them to disassociate and reassociate. Okay, because you can't do WPA with changing your address until they fix something. But that they would do that regardless. But you're telling me that there's another policy, which is that each time you connect, you get a new MAC address, but it doesn't expire
while you are associated. That was the recommendation in 802.11. And
so if I walk out of the hotel, having gone through their portal, I walk down the street, I come back in, then I'll have a new MAC address, even though it's only been 10 minutes that I've been gone.
If you decide to do what they call the privacy, which is do random, yes. Otherwise, if you say you remember this network, you could go
So
back.
that's a new one. It would be a per connection generated MAC address or something like that. Per session, I don't know. Someone pick a word. Right. I'm looking at Lorenzo because he might know. No, doesn't know that part. Doesn't know every line of Android. Yeah, that's the thing. Because I just walked out of the room, it disassociated, or I went into the bathroom, I came out, that would really be annoying if I have to go to the portal again. So there must be you'd think that they would have some minimum time, but.
Yeah, just to complement what I had in mind, I have to check what the devices do today, but it's basically, as I say, a combination of both. You have a different MAC address per SSID.
Yes.
And on that one, you may rotate that one every whatever amount of time, like 1 day, 2 days, whatever. So it's a kind of a combination of both, but not necessarily that every time you change network, you generate a new one.
So I would like to extend that with that concept. And as I said, I think it's important that we document, even if it's only one rev of one operating system done something weird, right? I think it's important that we document that for the simple reason that someone else is going to do that or show up with that wrong thing or think it's a good idea. And so we need to be able to say to them and have the conversation, are you doing this? And they go, yeah, that's what I'm doing. I'm doing like that. So, well, maybe you want to consider doing PPGM, not this other thing, right?
Great. Thanks. Thanks, Eric.
Eric Vink. Just a very small thing, but important. The name of the draft is MAC address randomization. The other draft use randomize and changing MAC address. So reflect this randomize and MAC address, state of affair or status or something like that, just to be consistent. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. We will do that. We will do that.
Thanks. Mathieu?
Yes. Can you hear me correctly?
Yeah. If you speak a little closer to the mic, probably it's going to be better.
Try to do it. Yeah, I just wanted to say that the idea of using a per station, the name per station, I think is a good one, my opinion.
Right, as compared to per network, yes. Or it's a different one. Okay, good enough. Okay, thank you very much. All right. So now we're moving to the next topic, which is the BCP handling RCM document. Should I share? Yeah. Stop. You need to share? It's there. Okay, so if that's okay, let me drive this from here. So this is a reminder of the discussion we had in the beginning. So we have these deliverables in our charter, right? First, and I'm copy pasting from the charter literally. So we have documenting current state of affairs, and we have two informational documents. One is the use cases and identity requirements document, and we heard already the presentation from Jerome. Then we have the MAC address randomization current state of affairs document. Then we heard the presentation from Carlos. And we are missing this third one, which is the BCP document that we've been talking about. So taking again another part of the draft of the charter, separating here in three different colors, just to make it easier. So let me read it quickly. The green part, we will generate a BCP document that will recommend means to reduce the impact of RCM on the documented use cases while ensuring that privacy is not compromised. So fair enough. We need to, the BCP needs to rely on the use cases that will be documented in the first informational document. Then if we go to the blue part, we will also recommend, of course, that's a BCP part, existing protocols that can be used to protect the request and exchange of identifiers between the client and the service provider. So this is basically what the MAC address was used for before. And if we want to preserve the network services, we need to exchange these identifiers between client and service provider. And we will first recommend whatever existing solutions are there. To do so, moving on to the purple part, the working group will work together with other working groups at the IETF, for instance, the HC, Interia. We will also liaise with other relevant organizations, like we've been talking to IEEE 802 and the WBA, to coordinate on these recommendations, as well as potential follow-up activities within or outside the IETF. So basically what we are saying here is that we need to, of course, first identify the use cases, these requirements. That's the part that we were talking earlier with Jerome. And to answer the question that we heard from you, we will first recommend whatever is existing there, and we will not constrain to IETF solutions. So we could also consider 802.1x. We could also consider Passpoint. So these solutions can come from IEEE 802, can come from the Wi-Fi Alliance. We are discussing actively with the WBA, and all that is still in our scope. So we're not limited to only pointing to RFCs from the IETF. If ever there's a solution that makes sense, we have in our mandate to talk about it, document it, and recommend it even in our BCP. If, of course, we found some gaps. then that's a different discussion. And at that point, we may say, okay, well, is this gap in an 802.11 specification? Let's talk to them and let them figure out if they will do something in 802.11bh. If there is a gap with the Wi-Fi Alliance, then we can talk to them. If what WBA is doing makes sense, we can also adopt it. But if ever there's an issue with an IETF document, at that point, I guess we would need to see if it's in the scope of one of the existing working groups or if there's something else to do. But basically, we cannot do any of that until we have identified the use cases clearly, the requirements for each one of these use cases, and we have evaluated the existing solutions that are out there. So that is, I guess, the main point of having the first two documents in a good shape so that we can start talking about the BCP. I'm not saying we will wait until those documents are published. We can work in parallel, but we need to keep in mind that the BCP, it's a follow-up of the earlier document. So let me stop here and see if there are any questions. I'm sorry? The next is about the discussions with WBA on the open roaming. So if we have something on the BCP, let's talk about it now.
Michael Richardson again. So fundamentally, my opinion, okay, on the BCP is there's a whole bunch of things that we just have to stop doing. That's the recommendation, is stop doing WPA PSK because it just doesn't work when everyone knows the PSK, because you just get, evil twins and they just put up a thing and then they get all your privacy information, right? So that's for example, just doesn't work, right? What we're doing in the IETF with our network, don't validate certificate, again, doesn't work because people just take your credit, they just watch you in layer 2, and the whole point of the RCM becomes moot, right? So I think there's a bunch of things. Don't have an open, non-encrypted hotel network and a portal. It can't work. And also, when you change your MAC address, you have to go through the portal again, which pisses everyone off, which means they turn off the RCM for the Hilton, which means that effectively anything that makes you turn off RCM is effectively an attack, is my opinion. So that means that we have to somehow move to having EAP TLS, otherwise known as WPA Enterprise, and we have to make it easy. And I don't see any way of any other direction. Like, that has to be our recommendation. And if that's too hard or whatever, then my answer is, okay, I guess you didn't really want privacy. Okay, and that's okay. You can make that decision, right? I really don't care if anyone knows my fridge is talking to my access point, because it's my fridge and it doesn't go to coffee shops and it doesn't go anywhere else, and that's all right. Okay, it contains the coffee, it doesn't go to the coffee, right? So I think that's something that I think we really need to make clear, and that RCM is a benefit, and it comes with a cost. And we have to decide if we're willing to pay that cost or not. And one of the costs is that means we actually have to have identities that are usable in our devices, that people can do things. So that's really all I have to say. I'm willing to work on this document, but you're going to have to put someone else with me to kind of hold me down a bit, because you won't like the result or you may not like the result, or it may be too radical. That's all.
Thanks, Michael. So. Am I right if I say that you're suggesting that we not only work on the do's, but also on the don'ts?
Sure. Do look both ways before crossing the street, okay? Don't step onto the street with your eyes closed. So, I mean, it's the same advice, okay? And in here, you will get killed because you look the wrong way. So we have to be clear when we're making a recommendation, we're going to have to be clear why other things do not work. So there was a recommendation, a suggestion, we could have a DHCP option to tell a portal that we're the same guy as last time. I'm like, well, that's just a new easier way to get your identity for an attacker to me. And yeah, so for instance, don't use EAP TLS 1.2 because your certificate will be in the clear over EAP. Do use EAP TLS 1.3, which is just barely a RFC at this point, because you get to encrypt your certificate and you get to validate the server cert before you send your client certificate. Okay, so that's a particular thing. So that may require, you know what, it may require an uplift of stacks all over the place, and it might be that we can't do it for 2 years, right? But I mean, at least we can write the RFC that says this is what you're supposed to do for that.
Yeah, thanks. I agree, and I think that goes in line with, at least from my point of view, with the philosophy and intention of IETF in general. When we have, for instance, security considerations, it's also to make sure that whoever reads the RFC understands what are the other things that they have to consider whenever they implement a specification. So in this case, to me, it makes perfect sense. Also, you make me think that the latest discussions in the Wi-Fi Alliance, for instance, are indeed talking about securing beacons and stuff like that. So it's true that we may not be aware of all the things that are happening. So a lot of these are upgrades to previous versions. So and that's for a reason that they do that. So making like a warning about don't use this previous version for X and Y makes perfect sense to me. We have someone else in the queue, Ackerman.
That's me, Mike Ackerman. I have a question on the mechanisms and how they work. When they're invoked, do they always randomize all 48 bits, or does that depend, or is it controllable, or is that a dumb question?
So I can start. Yeah, I mean, there is different implementations. I'll let Carlos get into the details. I can speak from at least from the standardization.
And I can tell you why I'm asking. We a lot of our network management tools, like the vendor bits, is there any way to freeze those so we can retain that and then still have privacy if we want and feel we need it?
So there is, I mean, for sure, there is the global and local bit that has to be respected, right? Because otherwise you have a globally unique identification. Then moving on, there are recommendations in NATO 2 about how to use and how to declare the rest of the bits. There's a specification that talks about a quadrant where you can define what type of randomization you're going to use. And you can also request a specific organization identifiers, but those are recommendations. So, okay. So to answer your questions,
sounds like I need to read a NATO 2 DAC.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean that all implementations will follow the recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Good info.
Yeah, basically, yeah. There are, as Juan Carlos said, you can do different things. And I guess your comment about keeping the kind of the OUEI, the prefix, and then randomize the second part is one of the quadrants that is defined. So the IEEE define a way of structuring the local space of MAC addresses. So there is a bit for local and global. And in the local, you can have this quadrant. So you play with 2 bits to identify which quadrant. And one of them is basically specified to do what you mentioned. While there are other approaches. You can randomize the whole 44 remaining bits. You can do other things, but one is exactly what you mentioned.
Good explanation. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for that. So, and Michael is gone, but thanks also for volunteering to work on the BCP before disappearing. Exactly, you went to start. Right. So if there are no more questions, then I'll move on to the next topic, which is this open roaming experiment that we've been talking about with the WBA. And as a reminder, open roaming is, if I simplify it, for people that are familiar with EduRoam, So EduRoam, it's this infrastructure that allows people from different academic institutions to connect to the network, and then we have been working with EduRoam and connecting to EduRoam for a while at the IETF. So you may have seen the SSID and people that belong or have affiliation with some academic institution automatically can connect to EduRoam. So Open Roaming expands that by using a passpoint from the Wi-Fi Alliance to allow not only one, but multiple identity providers. And there are a number of them. These can be cloud providers, service providers, corporations, cellular companies that already have some sort of a relationship to a client. And the idea is to allow different network infrastructures or network infrastructure providers to authenticate with these multiple identity providers whenever a user arrives. And we had originally brainstormed about doing something here in London. And just to give you an idea, what we were originally planning to do was to run this experiment so that the users would arrive, for instance, in Heathrow and would automatically connect if they had already installed a profile on their devices, and they could automatically connect to the Heathrow network or to the Heathrow Express train, and then onto the IETF. Of course, to the IETF, for people that have already attended one meeting, they already have the credentials, they can reconnect. There's nothing new. The new part would be the open roaming to foreign networks that you have not visited, but you can still authenticate to. And so for different reasons, this was not possible in London. There's multiple things that have to be put in place, but we are still considering doing this experiment for upcoming meetings, meaning Yokohama or San Francisco, in which case we will let people know if anyone is interested in participating in this experiment. Most likely it'll be required just to download a profile on the device, and at that point people would agree to join the experiment and would test on their devices about joining this open roaming experiment. So to give you an update about a little more details, since we did not run the experiment at this time, we did do some steps towards future meetings. So we had a technical meeting before IETF between WBA and the IETF NOC specifically, because they are the ones that run the network. For people that are not aware, we have the Network Operations Center team at the IETF, and they have to agree and look at all the details of any experiment that runs on the IETF network. As you know, this is critical infrastructure for our meetings, so we want to first make sure that it doesn't endanger our meetings. So the different points that we need to solve is who would be the identity provider if ever we run this experiment, or the identity providers, that we preserve the user's privacy as we always do with IETF attendees, how we would provision devices, meaning mobile phones or laptops with different operating systems, what are the requirements on the network setup, in this case IETF, so that IETF becomes a infrastructure provider that connects to the federation. And the next steps are to run some scenarios test before and during the next IETF meeting. And again, if we believe it's stable enough, we will advertise and invite people to join. Are there any questions? Okay. All right, so is that it? Next steps. So we only have one last item, which are the next steps. So in this case, well, the idea with the IAD support is, I think we are kind of clear in the sense that we have provided good guidelines to the authors of the two existing documents. We had a big question marks about the BCP, but I think we made some progress here, and we even have some volunteer to start editing something. which of course requires more work on the use cases. But otherwise, I think these immediate steps are what is needed, Eric, right? I don't know if you see something else that we need to work on.
We take the mic for the giant. Anyway, it's fine now. As you said, we are basically arriving at the end of the milestone. I mean, assuming that the BCP is done within a year, which I think is reasonable because we got already some basis, and Michael will provide more, and we may be our last but one or last but two Madinas meeting, and we declare success. Touching wood.
Okay.
And thanks as well for the working group because you provided some feedback, right, to improve the document. It's always interesting.
I have one comment or question. I think that as a potential next actions, so we have to, of course, provide an update on the different documents following or getting into account the feedback. But then maybe I would like to, at least as a co-author of one of the documents, I will appreciate if we can get some volunteers to review the next iteration of the document before the next IETF meeting, ideally. So if we can provide the next iteration in like 1 or 1.5 months time frame, then getting some feedback will be very, very useful.
Yeah, that's a good point. And in fact, a couple of the questions that we heard, it's part of the intention of these documents is precisely to answer those questions. So if you are interested in this topic, for instance, the implementations on the operating systems, so if you don't find the answer to your questions, it's super good information for the authors to provide, like, okay, well, I would like to understand what is happening, or what you are missing this reference, or I don't understand this part here of your document, or the question about the bits that are being randomized, etc. So please take a look at the documents and provide your feedback. That will be useful for the authors. Okay. Any more questions or comments? If not, we can get you to your dinner plans. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
That's old.